Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a story that honestly feels like it was pulled straight out of a premium cinematic video, but I promise you, it is entirely real. We're going to look at a pretty incredible mystery about a tiny country that is literally achieving the impossible.
So, picture this for a second. If you close your eyes and imagine our current world, it can sometimes feel a bit like a dystopian animation, right? You've got industrial giants burning through forests, thousands of massive factories pumping out smog, and skies just slowly filling up with heavy pollution. It's a pretty dark image. But, hidden completely away from all that noise, there is one nation that is secretly, quietly, and effectively healing the atmosphere. A single country that isn't just trying to do less damage, but is actively reversing the damage done by human civilization. Imagine a place so small that most people probably couldn't even point to it on a map. No massive army, no sprawling economy, no world-famous tech giants. And yet, this hidden kingdom is nailing something that the richest, most powerful superpowers have totally failed at.
You heard that right. They are the only carbon-negative country on Earth today. And I really want to emphasize the distinction here, because it's absolutely crucial. Most nations are out there having these endless summits, desperately trying to figure out how to just reduce their carbon output, right? They're aiming to be carbon neutral. But this country, they're carbon negative. They are actually pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere than they're putting in. And honestly, the most fascinating part of this whole unprecedented environmental miracle, it wasn't some happy accident. They did it completely on purpose.
That country is Bhutan. Picture a forgotten sanctuary, hidden high up in the sacred, towering mountains of the Himalayas, squeezed right between two massive global giants, India and China. The isolation of this place is just wild. You won't find giant cities covered in neon lights here or endless concrete highways stretching out to the horizon. In fact, this kingdom was so deeply cut off from the modern rush that they literally only allowed television inside their borders in 1999. Think about that. By the time the rest of us were booting up the internet age, Bhutan was just tuning in to its very first TV broadcast.
Just think about the sheer stark contrast of the numbers here. Every single year, the entire country of Bhutan emits around 2 million tons of carbon dioxide. Now compare that to what they absorb, over 6 million tons of carbon. They are literally scrubbing millions of tons of extra pollution right out of the air. I mean, in a modern world that is absolutely terrified by the looming realities of climate change, data like this almost looks like a typo. It seems impossible. So how on earth are they actually doing it?
Well, the secret sauce starts with a staggering figure, 70%. Over 70% of Bhutan's entire landmass is covered in these vast, sprawling, incredibly dense green forests. We are talking about massive canopies stretching endlessly across sweeping mountain ranges, deep valleys, and winding rivers. It's essentially a living, breathing green lung for the planet. But remember how I said this wasn't an accident?
Decades ago, Bhutan took a radical step that most countries wouldn't even dare to dream of. They took environmental protection and permanently hardwired it into their highest law. Their constitution actually requires that at least 60% of the country must remain forested forever. Think about how staggering that commitment is. They drew a massive line in the sand, officially prioritizing the protection of nature over any temporary short-term economic growth. There is no giant corporation that can just swoop in and buy their way around this rule. No way.
For Bhutan, nature is wealth. And this isn't just some dry environmental policy cooked up by scientists in a sterile boardroom. It stems from their deeply ingrained spirituality. Bhutan follows Vajrayana Buddhism. In their culture, the mountains aren't just rocks and the rivers aren't just water. They are deeply sacred, vibrating, and alive. This spiritual connection creates a society built on profound respect for the earth, totally rejecting that standard modern idea of relentless resource exploitation. To them, those towering forests are absolutely essential for human survival.
But hey, let's be realistic for a second. We have to pivot to a highly practical necessity here. Trees alone cannot explain how a country functions in the modern era. Bhutan isn't frozen in the Stone Age. They need electricity, transport, and development just like the rest of us. So how exactly does a modernizing nation generate the power it needs to survive without relying on the massive fossil fuel pollution that powers almost everywhere else?
Well, they discovered a powerful kinetic weapon hidden right inside their own geography, water. It's brilliant. Step 1, they tap into the enormous force of those fast-moving Himalayan rivers. Step 2, instead of building huge, dirty coal plants, they invested heavily into capturing that kinetic energy to create renewable hydropower. Almost all their electricity is perfectly clean, and step 3 is the absolute kicker. They actually produce a surplus. This tiny nation exports clean electricity to its massive neighbor, India, actively helping to reduce pollution far outside of its own borders.
And that brings us to a really revolutionary comparison. On one side, you have gross domestic product, or GDP, the global standard. It's that absolute addiction to endless economic growth and maximum production. On the other side, you have Bhutan's model, gross national happiness, a philosophy fundamentally focused on balance. You know, when Bhutan first announced this, the rest of the world kind of laughed. Giant economies thought they were incredibly naive, just completely disconnected from reality for not prioritizing extreme wealth. But looking around at the world today, struggling with climate collapse and pollution, Bhutan's focus on balance doesn't seem so foolish anymore, does it?
Which leads us directly to this terrifying but deeply necessary question. What is the point of becoming rich if the planet becomes unlivable? I want you to really think about that for a second. That mindset right there is the true, hidden secret behind their success. Bhutan intentionally sacrificed rapid, large-scale industrialization. They gave up the idea of massive manufacturing booms and urban sprawl specifically to protect nature because they asked themselves this exact question decades before the rest of the world even realized it was a problem.
But, of course, the isolation couldn't last forever, and a very complicated reality is setting in. The threats are creeping in fast now. Young people are leaving the villages. Modern consumption is rising sharply. Tourism is growing faster than ever before. And worst of all, the Himalayas are warming fast. Glaciers are melting. Deadly glacial lake floods are becoming a terrifying, immediate risk. The pressure is mounting from every single side, closing in fast on this protected mountain paradise.
And here is the dark, incredibly cruel reality of climate change. Despite doing everything right, despite being the only carbon-negative country on the planet and contributing almost nothing to global pollution, Bhutan is right in the crosshairs. The countries causing the least damage are so often the ones forced to suffer the most. Bhutan's pristine landscape and its people might suffer heavily from severe climate disasters that were manufactured by the industrial giants surrounding them.
So Bhutan stands at this massive, incredibly tense crossroads today. As globalization, the internet, and modern consumerism finally cross those mountain borders, they face the ultimate unsolved challenge. Can a country modernize without destroying the very thing that makes it special? Nobody, not America, not China, not Europe, has successfully solved this specific problem without sacrificing their environment. Bhutan is literally the ultimate test case playing out right now in real time. So, the crucial point here is Bhutan's most important lesson to the entire globe. For decades, global leadership just operated on the assumption that environmental destruction was simply the unavoidable cost of doing business, a necessary sacrifice for human civilization. But Bhutan unequivocally proves that a completely different path is possible. Human civilization absolutely does not have to destroy nature to survive and thrive.
We're reaching the emotional core of this whole story. Because today, as the world enters an era filled with severe climate anxiety, extreme weather, and massive environmental tipping points, scientists, global organizations, and climate activists are all desperately turning their eyes toward this tiny, isolated nation. Bhutan figured out the survival strategy decades ago. The lesson is simple, yet profoundly difficult for modern economies to swallow. You have to protect nature before it's too late, not after the damage is already done.
As we look at the beautiful, enduring landscapes of Bhutan, we're left to ponder this one final provocative thought. As humanity races forward, totally obsessed with relentless, endless growth, what kind of future are we actually building? It's a question that a small mountain kingdom dared to answer. And honestly, how the rest of the world chooses to answer it next may just decide the fate of our entire planet.